Hello and welcome to the Rumi Forum. We are here today with Dr. Robert Crane. He will speak to us on his book, The Natural Law of Compassionate Justice in Islamic Perspective. Dr. Crane is the former advisor to the late President of the United States, Richard Nixon, and former Deputy Director for Planning of the United States National Security Council. He has authored and co-authored more than a dozen books and over 50 professional articles on comparative legal systems, global strategy, and information management. Dr. Crane received his BA from Northwestern University, Evanston, Illinois in 1956, graduating summa cum laude with majors in political science, economic planning, and, forgive me, Sino-Soviet studies. He went on to obtain his JD from Harvard Law School, Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1959 with a specialty in comparative legal systems and international investment. His thesis, titled The Accommodation of Ethics in International Commercial Arbitration, was published in the Arbitration Journal, fall 1959. At Harvard, he also founded the Harvard International Law Journal and served as the first president of the Harvard International Law Society. Dr. Crane was admitted to the District of Columbia Bar in 1960. Dr. Crane is a Muslim scholar whose writings have inspired and enlightened his readers around the world. And just a special mention about Read One Communications, the president who's here with us today, Halil Shadid. He's in the back managing the camera, and he is from Read One Communications, which is the parent company of the award-winning television program, The Scholars Chair, which many of you are familiar with here today. So with that said, I will hand the floor over to Dr. Crane.
Could you hand me the book too? I haven't even seen it yet. This is the first time I've seen a copy.
All right.
With a hammer on front. I'm not sure I like hammers. Oh well. This book is really in two parts. Half of it was written, the last half was written for the Center for Understanding Islam, and the president of that is in the back with a camera, 3 or 4 years ago. But the founders of the funders of that decided that it was too negative. It was attacking those who attack Islam. And so they decided not to publish it, which was probably a good decision. So then I wrote another book, this one, which takes a positive view and points out what Islam is. And in the second part, it also explains what it's not, but without attacking anybody. Now the two parts, one is countering the evil of injustice and terrorism. Now, I don't go into countering the evils of injustice, but I've written a couple of books and many articles on it. Just briefly, there are two major evils in the world, and one is economic inequality caused by the concentration of capital ownership, which is getting worse and worse and worse. And that is a cause of alienation and terrorism. Second one is the concentration of political power in the world as a means to maintain order against the perceived threat of chaos in the world. So concentrating economic power, concentrating political power are, I think, two of the major causes of evil in the world, or I might even call them evil. The second part of countering the evil of injustice and terrorism is countering terrorism. And I've been doing that all my life. Earlier it was countering communist terrorism, and now it's countering radical terrorism wherever it is. And of course, right now we have Muslims who are leading the forefront of terrorism. And I might just list a couple of my writings on it to give you my approach. 1994, I published a booklet, Counterterrorism 101, Grand Strategy, the Missing Dimension of Foreign Policy, because there was no grand strategy, and I still think there's no grand strategy. And then in 2002, I wrote Religious Extremism, Muslim Challenge, and Islamic Response, because the Muslims are the principal challenge, and the classical Islam is the only adequate response. Let's see, 2004, New Frontiers in Conflict Management, a grand strategy to wage jihad against terrorist Muslims. This, I think, is primarily a Muslim responsibility. It's the intellectual jihad. I'll go into that later, which is the third jihad. It's mentioned only in the Quran. Well, let's see, 2005, Taproot to Terrorism, a long piece. Most of these have been published in journals. Also 2005, Reclaiming Islam, the Missing Dimension of Counterterrorism. This is missing in most of the think tanks. They don't see Islam as a principal force to counter terrorism by Muslims, or anywhere else for that matter. 2007, Mission of Muslims in America, a grand strategy to marginalize extremists. 2008, Seize the Moment, Interfaith Cooperation Against Terrorism. And then this past year, Religious Tribalism, a major obstacle to peace through justice. And then finally, the paradigmatic revolution of common ground, the common word and the common ground, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So that shows you my approach to terrorism and counterterrorism. That's not what this book is explicitly about, but it's really, let's say, one of the missions of the book. One of the tasks of Muslims is to expose the heresies against Islam that extremist hijackers of their religion are advancing to justify what amounts to a war against civilization. I think Sayyid Qutb invented the concept of a clash of civilizations. Other people picked it up later. So there's two approaches. One is to recapture the good words in Islam, such as the Sharia as a code of human responsibilities and rights. And that's what I'll emphasize mainly today. That's the focus of this book. The second step is to recognize and denounce the justifications that the violent criminals among the Muslims use for their actions. They and their actions should be denounced in terms that they understand, namely by words used in the Quran that apply expressly to them and their crimes. Their use of the word jihad, for example, for holy war, they call it holy war, although that really is a Christian term, is really terrorism. And it should be called by its proper name and its classical Islamic terminology, which is hiraba, or unholy and demonic war to destroy society. We have to make it clear to the ignorant or frustrated or alienated violent Muslims that they are waging hiraba. There's a good classical Arabic word for terrorism. They call themselves mujahidun, or holy warriors destined for Jannah or heaven. In fact, they are muharibun, guilty of hiraba, and mufsidun, guilty of fasad, which is everything bad basically in the world, headed for Jahannam, evildoers headed for hell. They claim that they are fighting for ihtiram, or human respect, whereas in fact they're committing istighlal, which is the cardinal sin of playing God. Their murderous assault on every human right should be exposed for what it is, namely a monumental act of rida shaitaniya, or diabolical apostrophe. We can talk to these guys supposedly hidden in the caves of Afghanistan to show them what they're doing, and from the perspective of classical Islamic thought. Because I don't think they've heard it, and I don't think they even want to hear it, but the real question is recruiting. How do we undermine their facility to recruit other terrorists? This is going to be a major task in the world ahead. We may be entering an era of so-called terrorism, but we have to look at the roots. And since most of the terrorism is not done by Muslims around the world, but a lot of it is, and therefore we have to focus on that. So the second part of the book is looking at what Islam is in the classical understanding over many, many centuries. Much of it disappeared over the last 600 years, but it's now being revived. The Muslim world became corrupt in Spain too, and they became afraid of knowledge, and that was the end of the civilization. That's sort of a one-sentence summary of what happened to the Islamic civilization. The core has always been justice. In every religion, it's a core, and compassionate justice, combining justice with law. I heard the students here today saying they were discussing what compassion is. And people have asked me, there is no such thing as compassionate justice. Justice is justice. And I would say, well, that's not in accordance with classical Islamic thought. There's a concept of tawheed. Everything is interrelated. You can't have compassion without justice, and you can't have justice without compassion. And this, I would say, is the essence of natural law. And this, I'll be going into that too. Now, from chapter 2 of this book, I'll just read, here and there, some paragraphs from it, because this, the first part of the book is explaining what Islam is, and actually what the classical teachings of every religion are. The introduction to chapter 2 says, we may accept the basic thesis that civilizations as the highest form of human self-identity will be increasingly important in the global village during the century ahead. The challenge is whether we can shift to the opportunity mentality in order to transcend the Cold War psychosis and make possible a century of peaceful engagement designed to promote the interests of all civilizations, nations, and persons. There are two underlying questions. Can we respect each other, and whether tolerance is sufficient for this purpose? Is tolerance compatible with peaceful engagement? Or is tolerance even a human right of natural law? I would say that tolerance is a bankrupt paradigm. There are basically three approaches, and there are several books that have explained this. Tolerance basically means I won't kill you yet. At a higher level, there's diversity, which means I can't stand you, but there's nothing I can do about it. And pluralism means we welcome you. We have so much to learn from each other because we each have so much to offer. Americans, there's a whole 300-page book on that by, I've forgotten his name right now, explaining that Americans always think we're one higher level than we are. And we should recognize that we have a long way to go, and have throughout our history. The major question is mutual respect. How can we have pluralism if we don't respect each other? Mutual respect must emerge from recognition that all the revealed religions contain a universal paradigm of thought. Muslims call it Islam. It's based on affirmation that there is an ultimate reality of which man and the entire universe are merely an expression, that therefore every person is created with some innate awareness of absolute truth and love, and that persons in community can and should develop from the various sources of divine revelation, including natural law, a framework of moral guidance to secure peace through compassionate justice. Recognition of this wisdom is the essence of classical thought in both America and Islam. I'm working on a book to show this in Christian teachings and Jewish teachings also, because the same problems, the same issues exist in all religions and all civilizations. The major intellectual challenge for Islamic scholars throughout their history has been to develop from the Islamic scriptures and from the ethical teachings of all civilizations a framework of moral guidance to secure compassionate justice. And there is a whole library of books that have been published just within the last 3 or 4 years. This is the cutting edge of new developments in Islam, partly in response to the fact that radicals have been trying to hijack classical Islam. There have always been radicals who have been trying to hijack it, but they've been marginal. They're still marginal, but we have to keep them that way. and make them more marginal. This framework of moral guidance is entitled the Maqasid al-Sharia, or the purposes of Islamic law, normative law. When I spent 3 years at Harvard Law School, 150 years ago, hoping to learn about justice, I never once heard the word in 3 years. Justice did not exist. Normative law did not exist. It was just precedents. If you can find a precedent, you'll win a case. And the purpose of Harvard Law School is to develop lawyers who can win cases. So this did not fit in at all with what I was interested in. What are the moral guidelines in every civilization for truth and justice? Justice is merely an expression of truth. Is there such a thing as absolute truth? There is, according to all the religions, but we'll never fully understand it. But it's hermeneutical, I guess you would call it. But we can search for it. The role of respect, because the role of respect is critical to this, the role of respect in the Islamic scriptures for followers of the Abrahamic religions, including Muslims as well as Jews and Christians, are brought out by citing 3 basic principles emphasized throughout the Quran. And the first half of the book, most of it is about these principles. The first one, all of these are pervasive throughout the Quran, is freedom of religion, which includes equality and human dignity, unity and diversity, universal conditions for salvation, and equality of the prophets. I'm not keeping track of time, but so I'll just list these. The book explains what I'm talking about and gives the quotations from the Quran and the Hadith. The third principle is love, which includes one's personal relationship with God, forgiveness, and peaceful reconciliation. And the third is compassionate justice, which includes both personal righteousness, or qist, and normative law, Maqasid al-Sharia. If I have time, I'll just give a couple of paragraphs on each of these. Freedom of religion, the first part of that, each of these have subheadings. This is how normative law works, incidentally. You have the highest level, the Maqasid, which are purposes. Then you have the hajiyat, which are a secondary level, which explains the higher one and shows how to implement it. Then you have tahsiniyat, a third level, which is program actions. This is modern business management. It's also the approach of the classical Muslim scholars. So under freedom of religion, the 3, I guess there are 3, equality and human dignity, immediately following the throne verse, which is the most beautiful in the Quran, describing the attributes of God, states simply, let there be no compulsion in religion, la ikraha fi din. This is axiomatic because ultimate or absolute truth does exist, and it's human instinct to seek it, but no person or community can know more than a portion of this truth. Certainly no one should claim to possess it or to the exclusion of others, because this would be the same as claiming to be God. It's clear from scholarly interpretation of the statement in the throne verse, however, which reads, he knows all that lies open before men, this is God, and all that is hidden from them, whereas they cannot attain to any of his knowledge except what he wills them to attain. The word for religion in Islam is deen. Well, I won't even go into that. I explain all the Islamic terms and various interpretations, and a lot of the discussion is interpreting individual words. Well, that's true in any discussion of paradigmatic thought, approaching everything from the top down. Well, let's see. I have several things underlined here, but let's go on to unity and diversity. Throughout the Quran, we're asked to see the coherence of the universe in the diversity that points to its creator. If uniformity were the norm, there would be only one standard tree, there would be one standard cloud, one standard sunset, but that is not the reality, and therefore it's or it's not reality because that's not the will of God. In the Quran, it says we're directed to see that reality consists of created beings to form pairs and to live in communities. We see that in all kinds of, I mean, I'm an expert on wolves, for example. They're created the same way we are. They have a sense of dignity, they have a sense of community, they form pairs. This is part of natural law. Maybe I'll quote this. Surah Al-Ma'idah 5:48 reads, "To you have we given the scriptures, just as we have given scriptures to people before you. We have protected your scripture in the Quran in its entirety. So judge among people from what knowledge has come to you, and do not be carried over by your vain desires." In other words, trying to take over other people because they have knowledge also. "Under every one of you, we have appointed a different governing system of law, shira, and a different way of life, minhaj. If God is so willed, all humanity would have been a single community. God's plan is to test you in what each one of you has received in both scriptures and inspiration. So strive as in a race in all virtues." Now, the universal conditions of salvation, which is the third part of the first of these three principles. One of the clearest and most insistent messages throughout the Quran and in the teachings and practice of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was the universality of salvation within the various religions that have developed in various times and places. Only three conditions are given as requirements for salvation in the Quran. It's repeated several times. These are: 1, belief in one God; 2, belief in the justice of God both in this world and the next; and 3, practice of good works. If you fulfill these three conditions, and most people in every religion do, they are Muslims. That's the generic concept of Islam and of Muslim in the Quran. It's all through the Quran. In Baqarah 262, we have this formulation: those who believe in the Quran, those who follow the Jewish scriptures; the Christians, those who follow the teachings of the gospel, in other words, the Christians; and the Sabians, who are basically everybody else. All who believe in God and the last day and do righteous deeds shall have their reward from their Lord, and they need have no fear, nor shall they grieve. The fourth one is equality of prophets. This is a very clear statement that one should not distinguish among prophets. God sent all of them. They have the same message, so don't set up conflicts among them. Now, the second of the three principles, pervasive throughout the Quran, is love. Now, many people say there is no love in the Quran, but that's because they haven't read the Quran. And a lot of Muslims say the same thing, incidentally. This is one of the problems, that the extremist Muslims are saying exactly what the Islamophobes say. They are taking extremist statements from other extremist Muslims, which go back all the way 1,400 years. There have always been extremist Muslims. And so if an Islamophobe wants to distort Islam as a religion, there's plenty of things to cite. There are plenty of extremist Muslims who agree with what the Islamophobes say. And one of the main concerns of, call them the Islamophobes, is that Islam is not a religion of love. But throughout the Quran, actually there are 5 different words that are used. The most important teaching, pervasive teaching in the Islamic religion, in my view, is the centrality of love. The word Islam means submission to God, but implies both love as the means to submission, as well as the resulting peace. The Quran often uses the term taqwa, which means loving awareness of God. Now, some Muslims will say it means fear. Allah is going to beat me up unless I do this or whatever. That is a very superficial interpretation of taqwa. The common word for love, hub, as the basis for the reciprocal relationship of love intended between God and the human person, first appears near the beginning of the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah 165. Those who have attained to faith love Allah more than all else. And I list, 20 or different in the book, 20 or 30 different places where hub is used. Well, I might even add, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to pray. One of his favorite prayers was, Allahumma as'aluka hubbaka wa hubba man yuhibbuka wa hubba kulli amali yukaribuni ila hubbika. O Allah, I ask you for your love and the love of those who love you and the love of everything that brings me closer to your love. And so it's bizarre that people say there's no love in Islam. Forgiveness, the second one. Compassion and mercy are the essence of Allah in His name Al-Rahman and are manifested in His attribute of action, Ar-Rahim. Almost every surah in the Quran begins with the invocation Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, as does every prayer by practicing Muslims. And in Surah Fatir, for example, it concludes with the statement that if it were not for the mercy of Allah, not a single living creature would enter heaven. People say there's no forgiveness, but the Quran makes it clear that everybody needs forgiveness. Nobody has ever gone to heaven without being forgiven. Reconciliation and peace is the third part of the second norm, the second of the Maqasid. The opposite of love and forgiveness is the ascription of collective guilt to another community because of the sins of some of its members. This leads to war. The Quran specifically condemns collective guilt as the origin of politically inspired hiraba, terrorism. Collective guilt is used, I discuss what's going on in the Middle East, but just by indirection, although I have a whole chapter quoting Rebbe Ibrahim Isaac Cook, who I think he was the chief rabbi of Palestine from 1919 to 1935, and in my view is probably the most profound spiritual person in the 20th century. But so I have a whole chapter on him. But the important thing is that people of all religions have to stop ascribing collective guilt to other groups of people because of some individuals. I'm just quoting here, collective guilt is used as the justification for blowing up Jewish babies and driving the Jews into the sea. Of course, extremists among Jews would like to do the same to all Palestinians in response to the perceived collective guilt of the entire world for the Shoah or Holocaust. And extremist Christians would like to nuke Mecca now rather than later as retaliation against the incineration of thousands of innocent people in the towers of the World Trade Center. But one crime of collective guilt does not justify another in an unending chain of destruction. Now, the Maqasid al-Sharia were developed over many centuries, and they have provided a very detailed sort of code of requirements for the just war. Whether there is such a thing as a just war is debatable. In Quran it says yes, but under 7 different requirements. Maybe as a footnote I should indicate that the papal legate 3 weeks before the United States invaded Iraq spent an hour with President Bush and explained that if you invade Iran under the present circumstances, you will violate all 7 of the just war requirements. And apparently that did not sink in. Well, okay, now what I would like to do is go through the 8 Maqasid.
Okay.
Just a couple of sentences on each.
Sure.
And I've written extensively on this. The first one is haq ad-din, which is freedom of religion, a duty to respect people and religion. The second one is haq al-nafs, which is the duty to respect the human person. And haq al-haya, the duty to respect life, comes in there. Third one is haq al-nasl, which is the duty to respect community. In international law, the Palestinians do not exist because they're not a state. In Islamic law, they exist because they're a community. 2 totally different views. One is sort of bottom up. You're legitimate because the individual is sacred. The other is you're legitimate only if someone has power to create a state. If you own, in the Harvard Law School I learned if any group, controls more than 51% of a territory, it can proclaim a sovereign state. Okay, the fourth one is haq al-mahid from wahda. And that's the duty to respect the environment, ecology. And that's been, it's new in Islamic thinking, but it's been inherent in everything Islamic. That's why they didn't elevate it to a maqsad, because it's assumed. And then there are four more. One is haq al-hurriya, which is the duty to respect self-determination. That's political freedom. And there's a whole set of things required under that. Most of these have not been observed in the Muslim world for centuries. Even, as a matter of fact, you can go back from the first century, halfway through the first century, these have been ignored, mostly. Not always. There are always exceptions, but basically the teachings have not been matched by the actions. And today they definitely are not matched. And this is why there's a revival of the Maqasid now, to revive the teachings. Most of the great scholars of the Maqasid were imprisoned. If you look at the history, the greatest ones were all imprisoned, and some of them died in prison because they insisted on these. And then there's the haq al-mal, which is the duty to respect economic justice. And this means basically broadening ownership of productive goods. Because if the ownership is concentrated, as it is now in the world more than ever before, this is going to create an environment for political concentration of power. And this is what people in the world are worried about, both of these. And then haq al-karama, which is the duty to respect human dignity. This includes all the others, but especially gender equity. This is being revived very strongly now by Muslim women, because nobody else is going to do it. If they don't, it's not going to be done. The men will support it, but they're not going to stick their necks out. The women have to do it, and they're doing it. And the next one is haq al-ilm, which is the duty to respect knowledge. And here's where the freedom of assembly, speech, and publishing and so forth comes from. That is very, very basic to Islam. But that also has been ignored pretty much for 1,400 years. And it's been ignored in every civilization. The Muslim civilization is not unique. Now the question is, how do we bring out the best of all the world's religions in order to create a pluralist religion in the future? And I think it's going to have to come from rehabilitating the role of religion in the world. Religion is either ignored or it's perverted, and so people will say, well, it's the major problem, therefore let's get rid of religion. But that's our problem. This is what we have been doing. So I think we have to rehabilitate the role of religion, and that's why I selected the title of the book, The Natural Law of Compassionate Justice. That is sort of a condensation of what needs to be done. In every religion, we have to revive first the concept of natural law. There is such a thing as absolute truth, and we can work towards understanding it. And justice is its application. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much. The reason my name is Khalil Shadi, by the way. I'm the publisher of Read One Communications, and Bob has been so gracious in allowing me to print his manuscript.
We've known each other for 25 years.
Well, yeah. But I appreciate the opportunity to put the wonderful words that you just briefly went over into print, because I think it's desperately needed, not only by the majority of the Muslims in the world, but also how Americans can identify effectively with the Islamic world. So I appreciate the work. I'm here to field questions, so I like very much to see whether there are questions from the audience. I think that our procedure is that there's somebody here with a mic, I believe. Or maybe I will use my mic.
You have to yell.
And, okay. And there's one, two, three, four. Okay, you stirred a lot of conversation here, Bob. So we'll start here. If you introduce yourself and...
Yes. My name... Is it working? Yeah. My name is Nini Sharikin. I am from House of Creative Writing, LLC. Thank you very much for your enlightened speech, Dr. Crane. Responding to what you are presenting to us about terrorism, and then from the two extremist views from the Islamophobes, I would like to ask you, what is the proper response then to the Israeli occupation to Palestine, the U.S. invasion to Iraq, and also the Danish cartoonists. So I understand that we have to be patient. Is patience the answer? So please enlighten me.
I would say that sabr, patience, is the beginning. If you're not patient, you're not going to be able to follow long-range policies, which are the only policies that can really make a difference. In the case of Palestine, I think that a single state is a bad approach, because the concept of state in Western thought means you exclude God. The government itself is the highest authority. And once you state that man is the highest authority, morality goes by the book. So any state, an Islamic state, Christian state, Jewish state, they're all un-Islamic. I think they're also un-Christian and un-Jewish, simply because of the Western definition of state. You can call it a polity, government, society, whatever you want. But state is a loaded term. It means that somebody is going to control everybody else. Definition of a state that I learned at Harvard Law School. Two states is irrelevant, because one of the states basically cannot exist. You can call it a state, but it wouldn't be. It would be like in South Africa, Bantustans. There is a third approach, which would be a federation. And this can be approached, I've been writing about this for 40 years, whether it's in Burma or, instead of insisting on one state to control a lot of diverse peoples, it's better to have a federation, so everybody has a role. Power comes up from the bottom rather than from the top down. An Abraham Federation in the Middle East is doable, but it would take a long time. Sabr, can people wait? I'm an advisor of Ahmed Yusuf, have been for many, many years, who is the deputy foreign minister of Hamas. He is very enlightened. He was one of the two founders of Hamas in 1983, intellectual founders. He is a minority in a group which is basically governed by Mashal in Syria. There's big differences within Hamas. One is very enlightened. Hamas was founded in order to avoid violence back in 1983. When the first Intifada came along, people started getting radical, and there have been splits ever since. Anyway, let's see, I generally don't talk about the Middle East. And the reason is people are not ready to look in the long term. They want what they want right away. And if not, they're going to use force. And there's no future in that. Now, the other, Iraq. Same thing in Iraq. The British created Iraq. 3 people that should never have been together in the same country were put together in the same country for a deliberate purpose, to make sure people would fight against each other and not against the British. The British occupied Iraq for 12 years and they gave up. It was just impossible. The colonial countries split up the world according to their own spheres of influence, and in order to make sure that the local peoples could never get uppity, could never throw off the colonial rule. So then when finally the colonial powers left, we had all these people either split up or 2 peoples put together in one sovereign country, and most of these countries make no sense. Sudan makes no sense at all, but the British put it together. Burma makes no sense. Russia the Soviet Union made no sense. These are all empires. I would say even India is an empire. China is an empire. They're all founded copying the Western model of imposing power from the top down. There have always been, there have always been empires, many Muslim empires. As a footnote, I would say the Ottoman Empire was one of the most successful because they permitted diversity. They did not try to impose central power. And so the peoples in Iraq had no problems because they were running their own affairs. The U.S. policies have always been to centralize power, economic power, political power. Afghanistan, a wonderful example. We want to have a strong central government. They don't want that. They've never had it. They never will have it. I don't know, I'm getting this too long an answer, but we need sabr in order to follow long-range paradigmatic solutions. We need paradigmatic revolution. And most people are focused on the next year or two for political reasons or whatever. They can't, their bottom line has to be what can we achieve visibly now, not how can we change the way we're looking at something to change the whole future of the world.
How about the Danish cartoons?
In a case like that, ignore them. That's my that's my approach. I mean, why should we lower ourselves to responding to things like that? I mean, that's why the COI did not publish the book responding to Robert Spencer. Teach what Islam is, not try to counter what people say it's not. It's a matter of psychology. Take the high road. Focus on how to make things better. Not, I mean, if somebody has a very negative approach, I think we should oppose that negative approach, but I think we should emphasize the positive.
Yeah. I think we have someone from the State Department who's standing. Got your mic on.
Dr. Crane, my name is Harold Bonnequist. I'm a Foreign Service Officer with the State Department, and I'm currently working on the Iraqi justice system. And my question is about the relationship between justice and freedom.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking this question, in your talk you use freedom only in a rather narrow sense, freedom of religion. Important, but narrow. And when we invaded Iraq, or as we like to refer to it as liberated Iraq.
And we did, from Saddam Hussein.
And we went in, and the battle cry was, "We are bringing you freedom."
Right.
And I know from my time in Iraq, this did not resonate with Iraqis. It resonates with Americans because we view our role in the world as extending freedom to all peoples. So my question to you is, what does the Quran view the proper sphere of freedom to be, given that Islam means submission, and how can we better present our goals in a way that is more likely to resonate with the people we're trying to work with?
I think the very simple answer to that, we can talk about freedom, but we have to say what it means is justice. All of the Maqasid, the 8 that I mentioned, can be described as principles of freedom. Principle of freedom for the community, freedom, economic freedom from control by concentrated wealth, political freedom from concentrated political power, freedom of gender, freedom of knowledge. Those are all promoting freedom, every one of them. If you submit to God, that means not that you're abandoning your own freedom. I mean, we always have freedom. We were created with freedom to do whatever we want. We have the right to choose. But the ultimate freedom, as the saints in Christianity and Islam also, the ultimate freedom is to be who God created you to be. You don't know who that is. You may construct a false identity, but there is a real identity that you were born with, and you have to try to find out what it is and become that. That's the ultimate freedom. So you're absolutely free. If you're absolutely free, you want nothing other than to become what God created you to be. That's the ultimate freedom. And Muslims can understand that. Everybody can understand this. It's born in us, in our human nature. If we start talking in those terms, the Muslims in Iraq will understand us. But we have to make sure that we're using justice as a means to freedom. Well, if you look at the preamble of the American Constitution, there are 5 purposes of creating a unified union. The first is justice, and then there's prosperity. No, the first comes security, I think, national defense, prosperity, and then freedom. Freedom comes last. It's a product of all the other 4. And this is the Islamic perspective. Justice comes first. Freedom is a result. You don't aim for freedom. I mean, if you just aim for freedom, I want to do whatever I want to do, period. And Muslims will not accept that. Nobody will accept that.
Bob, we have time for 2 more questions. I think there was Sarah.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Crane. My name is Sarah Hassan, and I'm actually I'm the founder and president of oneblue.org. First of all, I just want to thank you for your talk about your book, and the book, I'm really looking forward to reading it. I have sort of like an introspective question. I think what really struck me was how few Muslims actually talk about how we have to tackle this problem from within. And, you know, I'm an advocate of cleaning out your own house before you tell the neighbors how to treat you. Mm-hmm. And I kind of tell that to my kids as well. You always have to figure out how to improve yourself before you expect things from other people. Mm-hmm. So my question is, and I see this in the work that I do, that the Islamic world is just so diverse in every sense of the word. I mean, in terms of races and cultures and ethnicities and socioeconomic backgrounds. How do you actually get people to return to the core of Islam, be attracted to the very concept of ilm and iqra and knowledge and learning about their religion, rather than just going with the flow of whatever's happening in this world, the world of the dunya, versus returning to educating themselves, even if it's just very basic about their religion? Then we wouldn't have these issues when we rely on other people to interpret our religion for us, and we depend so much on mullahs that haven't even been outside of their own villages and are interpreting the Quran for you. Yeah. So how do we even start to address the issue of changing from within, so that, you know, like yourself and many other people who convert to Islam or find Islam, are able to see things from the outside and criticize and find faults within Islamic society. But how do we do that ourselves? I mean, because I grew up in the Middle East blindly following a culture and a religion, and it wasn't till I came out here and started to think, what's Islamic and what's cultural, what should I shed and what should I keep? I mean, that's a real jihad in itself. But how do you expect, or how can you advocate Muslims to start changing from within and returning to the core of studying their own religion, even if it's just to read the Quran in a very basic way? Thank you.
That's probably the biggest issue in the entire world for everybody in every religion. How do you develop independent thinking so that you can judge people in your own religion who are distorting it in some way or another? And, you know, it's a common issue everywhere. One of the problems is that I found among Muslims, and you know, I always was a Muslim, but I didn't realize it for many decades. I wanted to become, I'm a Franciscan monk, and I had problems with the Trinity, so that was the end of that. But the teachings of Christianity they're the same, basically. Some of the best thinking, as a matter of fact, has been done by the fathers of the church. St. Thomas Aquinas said that Ibn Sina is my mentor. He says, when I'm talking about my mentor in everything, I mean Ibn Sina. St. John of the Cross borrowed everything, his document, his language, everything that he taught. He's one of the greatest Christian saints. He said, I borrowed all of this from Sheikh Shadili, North African, not a saint, North African spiritual leader, the only head of a big tariqa outside of Asia, the Shadili. So it's very important to study the same issues in every religion, because they are the same. And they borrow, they work together. One of the major problems, I can just look at the problems I have seen within the Muslim community. There were 2 books written by that, I've forgotten the name, Even Angels Ask, whatever his name is.
Dr. Jeffrey Lang.
Jeffrey Lang, yeah. Yes. Muslims didn't even understand what he was saying. He was saying that, you know, angels asked God, why are you creating human beings? And God said, I have my own reasons. I mean, you don't know what they are, but there's a reason. And so Jeffrey Lang is saying, the angels were wondering, why are you creating these Muslims? They've got so many problems. That's what he was saying about Muslims in America. They didn't even understand what he was saying. And part of the problem, number of problems, we don't have time for them all, but one of the problems is that Muslims think that in order to be unified, you have to be uniform. And then they start arguing. I'm right, so everybody has to agree with me, and then we'll have uniformity. And I said, well, that's the exact way never to get unity. And it's difficult for people to understand that. Another is how to look at empowering other people rather than just yourself. This is a huge problem. And I gave a talk once in 1985. At that time, it was the largest gathering of Muslims in the United States. And I was asked to talk about American strategy. And so I gave this nice talk about what an Islamic American foreign policy would be. What's a good Islamic strategy for America to follow? Dead silence. Nobody had any idea what I was talking about. They thought I was going to talk about how to counter America, strategy against America, not a strategy for America.
I understand, Bob. We're going to take one more.
It's a mindset, and we have to change the mindset. And the only way to do that is very simple, is to submit our own future to God and spend our lives trying to figure out what that is. And we'll never know, but if we're sincere, we have a good intent, that's all that anybody can ask of us.
Stan, we'll take one more question after this one.
Thank you very much, Dr. Crane. I've really, really enjoyed this lecture, and I'm looking forward to read your book. My name is Alfeka Mutardi. I'm a convert to Islam and recently retired economist. Could I follow up on your statement about the state?
Mm-hmm.
Is what you're saying is that Islam is not compatible with having a state or with having an Islamic constitution? That was one of the first fitnas of the great difficulty that the Islamic community faced. Is it not possible to take these basic principles and translate them into something equivalent to a Bill of Rights and a way to govern ourselves, so that we, as a way to somewhat encodify, to have representation from the bottom up and to marginalize these extremists?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've written extensively on that because haq al-hurriya, which is the duty to respect human self-determination and freedom, is very basic to Islam. When I'm referring to the state as being un-Islamic, I think it's more un-Christian than it is un-Islamic, because the state was invented in 1638 at the Treaty of Westphalia. The Lutherans, or the Protestants, and the Catholics had fought a war for 30 years. It was devastating Europe. And they finally reached agreement, and they said, we will no longer accept the authority of the church. We will no longer accept the authority of God. The ultimate authority is each of the principalities that was governing then, whether they were kings or dukedoms or whatever, each one will have ultimate sovereignty, not God anymore. This was a change in mindset. And from then on, the ultimate authority was always a state, and they didn't designate whether it had to be a democratic state or a republican state, just whoever had power. And that's why I say a state in the Western sense is un-Islamic. It's also un-Christian. It's un-Jewish. It's contrary to human nature. Power should come from the bottom up, not the top down, whether it's economics or politics. And you need a constitution. There are three. Well, I'll go to the next level of haq al-hurriya. There are various levels. The second level, there's khilafah. Khilafah means that the rulers and the ruled are equally responsible directly to God, which is the opposite of the state. I use the word polity, which means a political system. Second is shura. The rulers must be responsive to the ruled. Shura would be translated as, there's a good word? Consultation, yeah. But it has to be systematized, it has to be institutionalized, and that's where you need to have a parliament of some kind. In a simple society, I mean, I come from a Cherokee background, and I was raised in that culture, and I know their system very well. They don't have one man, one vote. I mean, traditionally, they had, call them clans, I guess, groups, and they would each elect somebody who had authority just because he they recognized they had authority. There's no formal structure. The clans then, I don't like the word clan because of Ku Klux, but they then appointed a higher level, and that level appointed still a higher level. And the interesting thing, because this is a federal system, and the Iroquois borrowed this from the Cherokee. Thomas Jefferson borrowed the entire American system of federalism, which did not exist previously, from the Iroquois. And the Iroquois got it from the Cherokee. This is another long story. Who got it from the Mali kingdom in Africa, who sent two great expeditions over in the year 1210 and 1210 and 1212. And this should be written up in a book. The American system came from Islam. This is not unique. I mean, if you study the various systems of the world, you'll find that the bottom-up concept is very common. It's almost human nature, because authority basically always exists in the human being. One's personal sanctity comes directly from God. It doesn't come from the state. It works upward through the family, the community, to the highest level, to all of humanity, or even, meta law, the law that would govern all the sentient beings in the universe. No, the reason why Islam is compatible with representative government is that representative government is a balance between universal principles and the desires of the people. And we call that a republic in Western political science. The difference between a republic and a democracy is that a democracy can become a tyranny, a mob. If 51% say something is good, that's it. America was founded on the exact opposite. There are eternal principles which the legislature must recognize in making laws. The job of the judicial system is to make sure the legislature is doing that, and the job of the executive system is to make sure that whatever the judicial system and the legislature together decide is followed. This is a republic. As a matter of fact, Benjamin Franklin was asked at the Constitutional Convention in 1789, "What kind of a system have you created?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it."
Benjamin Franklin was my favorite. One last question.
Sure. Hi, I'm Max Skelton from the Buxton Initiative. I just wanted to sort of clarify your understanding of pluralism, as you sort of laid out at the beginning, tolerance, diversity, and pluralism. Just from personal experience, forgive me if I sort of over-personalize this,
well, everything doesn't mean much unless it's personal.
Well, there you go. So my friend Rizwan, he's Muslim, I'm Christian, we agree on a lot, but we also disagree on a lot when it comes to theological matters. And if I recognized his conception of certain things, I would essentially, in my view, cease to be Christian.
Yeah.
However, we are still good friends. We get along. We respect one another. So I guess at one point I thought I heard you saying that all religions need to sort of come to this realization that we all have we share pieces of absolute truth and things like that. And I understand the concept, but I think it is highly unlikely that you're going to convince people to not be theologically exclusive. Rather, you should probably convince them to respect one another. It's just wanted to hear your thoughts.
It's a matter of multiculturalism. What do you understand by multiculturalism? It can mean that all cultures are equal, and therefore there's no such thing as truth, because if they differ, obviously there's no truth. Multiculturalism, to me, should mean all cultures have something to offer, and they should remain their own cultures. I mean, as a Cherokee, I will defend the Cherokee culture, what's left of it, very strongly. That's my identity. I'll always defend my identity. However, there's let's say maybe levels of truth. The externals, well, look at it as a circle. All the religions are at the circumference of a circle, and they all have different practices, different beliefs. But their purpose is presence of God, basically, to be in the presence of God in this life and the next. And there are many paths to that, and they all differ. But the closer they get to success in being in the presence of God, the less differences there are, and until eventually there are no differences. But at the external level, sure, they're very different. Now, the Trinity is a Christian doctrine. The Muslims do not accept it, and they never will agree. And they don't have to agree. They have the same purpose. I mean, the individual Christians and Muslims have the same purpose. Actually, I look at, this makes me a heretic, of course, a Christian heretic. I look at the Trinity at a very high level. There's existence. We live in existence. At a higher level is God, but God's attributes. The Father would be power, the Son would be forgiveness, the Holy Spirit would be wisdom. These are attributes in Islamic thinking of God. They are personified in Christianity. But many Christians will say that there's a higher level, the Godhead or beyond being. Now, there's existence, there's being at a higher level, and beyond being is beyond the Trinity. Meister Eckhart developed this in a great length in his teachings, and he was excommunicated, of course, but by the Avignon Pope, so he became a hero in my work. Hans Kung says the same thing, and he has been forbidden from teaching at a Catholic university for 20 years. Pope John Paul XVI approved of his, well, he's now permitted to teach. He wasn't excommunicated, he was just forbidden from teaching in a Catholic university. He now has the permission to teach. And this is one of the things that I've discovered, and we find it among Muslim scholars. They differ among themselves, but they don't dare admit it. Well, if they're privately, they will say, you know, we can't say this publicly, but you and I know such and such. And I think you'll find this in all religions. There's a pressure to maintain orthodoxy. You need orthodoxy. I mean, no religion can survive unless there is some orthodoxy. But there is a level where you have to pursue a truth as you can pursue it, and recognize that other people are going to pursue it differently. It doesn't mean that there isn't such a thing as absolute truth. It means that there are different paths to it. And you know, if you say that God is three persons, it makes no sense to me. But what Jesus said, I am the truth, the way, and the life, absolutely true. The problem in the world is we don't follow that. I mean, I learned to love Jesus after I became a Muslim. Sort of surprise people, because he was the divine messenger of God, but I couldn't pray to a messenger. You know, that's me. You are different, and fine, you should be different. I guess that's all I can say.
Give Robert a point.